Most men think attraction is about saying the right things, looking a certain way, or constantly proving their worth, but that's exactly where they lose. What if the real trigger of attraction isn't effort, but restraint? Not chasing, but controlling your presence? There's a subtle behavior, almost invisible, that 99% of men completely miss, yet it's the one thing that quietly captures a woman's attention and keeps it. Today, we're uncovering that hidden psychology, the behaviors that don't scream for attention, but command it. There's a moment most men have experienced when you're trying to say the right thing, act the right way, maybe even become someone slightly different, just to be noticed, just to be chosen. And yet, somehow, the harder you try, the less it seems to work. It feels confusing, almost unfair. Because what no one really tells you is this: attraction isn't built on effort the way you think it is. It's built on perception, and perception is shaped in silence, in subtlety, in what you don't do. Most men are taught to react, to respond quickly, to prove interest, to show emotion instantly. But there's something powerful about the man who doesn't rush to react. When you pause, when you choose your response instead of giving it away impulsively, you create space. And that space is where perception begins to shift. Psychologically, non-reactivity signals control. It tells the other person, without words, that your emotions aren't easily shaken. And that kind of stability is rare. It stands out in a world where most people are driven by impulse. The truth is, people are constantly scanning for emotional safety, even if they don't realize it. And calmness under pressure, that's interpreted as strength. Then there's attention, something that seems so simple, yet it's one of the most misunderstood elements of attraction. When attention is given freely, without limit, it loses its weight. It becomes predictable, and the human mind doesn't hold on to what feels guaranteed. But when attention is controlled, when it's given with intention rather than desperation, it becomes valuable. Not because you're playing a game, but because you're respecting your own time and energy. Subconsciously, this creates a shift. Instead of you seeking validation, the dynamic begins to reverse. Curiosity forms, interest deepens, because people naturally value what feels selective. And beneath all of this lies something even deeper: self-worth. Not the kind that's spoken or displayed loudly, but the kind that's felt in your presence. A man who constantly tries to prove himself unknowingly communicates doubt. It's subtle, but it's there. On the other hand, when you move through interactions without needing approval, without adjusting yourself to be accepted, something changes. Your energy becomes grounded. You're no longer asking, "Am I enough?" You're simply existing as if you already know the answer. And that quiet certainty, it speaks louder than any words ever could. Because at a psychological level, people don't just respond to what you say, they respond to what you believe about yourself. Another shift happens in how you handle time and emotional progression. Most men rush. They try to build connection quickly, to create closeness instantly, thinking speed equals success. But attraction doesn't thrive under pressure. It grows in space, in moments of anticipation, in the unknown. When you allow things to unfold naturally, when you don't force depth before it's ready, you create an emotional rhythm that feels organic. And that rhythm is powerful because it mirrors how the human brain forms attachment, not through intensity alone, but through consistency, curiosity, and gradual investment. Slowing down doesn't weaken attraction, it strengthens it. There's also a balance that very few men understand: the balance between being present and being overly invested. When you give too much too soon, when your energy becomes heavy with expectation, it creates pressure, and pressure disrupts attraction. But when you engage fully in the moment, without attaching yourself to an outcome, something shifts. You're there, but you're not clinging. You're interested, but not dependent. This creates a psychological pull, a kind of tension that keeps the interaction alive. Because uncertainty, when it's healthy, fuels curiosity. And curiosity is the foundation of attraction. And then there's presence itself. Not loud, not dominating, not forced, but calm and grounded. A man who doesn't need to control the room yet naturally influences it. This kind of presence doesn't come from trying to impress, it comes from being deeply comfortable with yourself. It's the way you carry silence without needing to fill it, the way you listen without waiting to speak, the way you remain steady, even when the environment shifts. Psychologically, this is perceived as quiet dominance, not in an aggressive sense, but in a composed, assured way. And that kind of energy is rare. It doesn't demand attention, it attracts it. All of these shifts point to something deeper, a change in mindset. Moving away from the need to chase, to prove, to control outcomes, and stepping into a space where you simply become, where your focus isn't on being liked, but on being aligned with who you are. Because in the end, attraction isn't something you force, it's something you allow. It's built in the pauses, in the restraint, in the confidence that doesn't need to be announced. And when you understand that, everything changes. Because the less you try to impress, the more you naturally do. Most men never realize that the very thing they think builds attraction is often the thing quietly destroying it. It's not a lack of effort that holds them back, it's misdirected effort, trying too hard to be seen, to be liked, to be chosen. And in that process, something subtle happens. They lose the one thing that actually creates intrigue: their natural center. Attraction at its core is not logical. It's deeply psychological. It forms in the spaces between actions, in the signals people don't consciously notice but constantly feel. And one of the strongest of those signals is how a man handles his reactions. Most people are predictable. They respond instantly, emotionally, without pause. But when a man breaks that pattern, when he chooses calm over impulse, it creates a psychological disruption. It makes people pay attention. Because now, instead of reading him easily, they have to wonder. And that curiosity, that slight unpredictability, is where attraction begins to take shape. There's a certain strength in not reacting the way everyone expects you to. It's not about being distant or cold, it's about being in control. When your emotions don't swing with every situation, you project something rare: stability. And the human mind is naturally drawn to stability, especially in a world that feels chaotic. It creates a sense of safety, but also a sense of respect. Because deep down, people associate emotional control with inner strength. Then comes attention, one of the most powerful currencies in human interaction. Most men give it away too easily. They overtext, overengage, overinvest, thinking it shows interest. But psychologically, when something is always available, it loses its perceived value. Not because it lacks worth, but because it lacks challenge. The mind craves what it has to work for, even slightly. So when a man becomes selective with his attention, not playing games, but genuinely valuing his own time, something shifts. His presence becomes more meaningful. His absence becomes noticeable. And suddenly, the dynamic is no longer one-sided. But attention alone isn't enough. Beneath it lies self-perception. How you see yourself shapes how others experience you. If you constantly seek approval, it creates an invisible tension, a quiet neediness that people can feel, even if they can't explain it. On the other hand, when you move with an internal sense of certainty, when you don't need constant reassurance, you create a completely different energy. You're no longer trying to be accepted. You're simply expressing who you are. And that authenticity, that quiet self-trust becomes magnetic. Because people are drawn to those who seem complete within themselves. Another layer most overlook is timing, emotional timing. There's a tendency to rush connection, to fast forward intimacy, thinking it will secure interest. But the human brain doesn't build deep attraction through speed. It builds it through progression, through moments of anticipation, small discoveries, gradual emotional investment. When you slow things down, when you allow space between interactions, you give the other person time to think about you, to feel your absence, to build their own curiosity. And that process is essential. Because attraction grows strongest when it's not forced. At the same time, there's a fine balance between being engaged and being overly attached. When you lean in too much, too early, your presence can start to feel heavy. Expectations begin to form, pressure builds, and pressure disrupts the natural flow. But when you stay grounded, when you're fully present in the moment without clinging to an outcome, you create a different kind of experience. One that feels light yet meaningful, interested but not dependent. And this balance creates tension, not negative tension, but the kind that keeps people intrigued. The kind that makes them want to understand you more. And then there's something even deeper: your overall presence. Not what you say, not what you show, but how you feel to be around. A man who is constantly trying to prove himself carries a certain energy, restless, seeking, slightly unsettled. But a man who is comfortable within himself carries something entirely different: a calm, grounded presence that doesn't need validation. He doesn't rush to fill silence. He doesn't compete for attention. And because of that, he naturally stands out. Not by doing more, but by needing less. This is what most men miss. They focus on external strategies, lines, techniques, appearances, without realizing that attraction is shaped internally first. It's about how you think, how you regulate yourself, how you value your own time and energy. When those things shift, your behavior changes without effort. And when your behavior changes, perception follows. Attraction isn't about becoming someone new. It's about removing what was never needed in the first place: the overthinking, the chasing, the constant need to prove. And what's left is something far more powerful, something natural, something real. Because in the end, the man who doesn't try to control attraction is the one who understands it. There's a quiet pattern that plays out again and again. A man meets someone he's drawn to, and almost instantly, something shifts inside him. His thoughts speed up, his actions become more calculated, and without realizing it, he starts moving away from his natural self. He begins to perform instead of exist. And that's where the disconnect begins, not because he lacks value, but because he's trying too hard to show it. Attraction doesn't respond well to performance. It responds to presence. And presence is something you can't fake, because it comes from internal alignment. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions are grounded, people feel it. But when you're seeking a reaction, trying to get a specific outcome, that intention leaks through in subtle ways. The way you speak, the way you pause, even the way you listen, it all carries a certain pressure. And pressure, no matter how well hidden, quietly pushes people away. One of the most overlooked shifts is learning to hold your reactions. Not suppress them, but control them. Because every situation gives you two options: react instantly or respond intentionally. Most choose the first. They reply quickly, they express everything at once, they give away their emotional state without filtering it. But the man who pauses, the one who allows a moment of silence before he responds, creates something different. That pause carries weight. It shows that he's not driven by impulse. And psychologically, that signals strength. People are naturally drawn to what they don't fully understand. Predictability feels safe, but it doesn't always create attraction. There has to be a level of uncertainty, not confusion, not inconsistency, but a sense that there's more beneath the surface. When you don't react in expected ways, when you don't follow the usual patterns, it creates curiosity. And curiosity is powerful. It keeps the mind engaged. It makes people think about you even when you're not there. Then there's attention, something that most men give without boundaries. It feels right to show interest, to be available, to respond quickly. But when attention becomes constant, it loses its impact. It turns into background noise. The human mind adapts quickly to what feels guaranteed. But when attention is intentional, when it's given with awareness instead of urgency, it becomes meaningful. It creates moments instead of noise. And those moments stay. This isn't about playing games or pretending to be busy. It's about genuinely having a life that doesn't revolve around one person. When your focus is balanced, when you have purpose, direction, and things that matter outside of attraction, you naturally become less reactive. Your energy shifts from seeking to choosing. And that shift changes everything. Because now, instead of asking for attention, you're deciding where to place it. At the core of all of this is self-worth. Not the kind that needs validation, but the kind that exists quietly. A man who doesn't feel enough will always try to compensate. He'll over-explain, over-give, over-commit. And even if his intentions are good, the energy behind those actions feels heavy. On the other hand, when you truly believe in your own value, your actions become lighter. You don't feel the need to convince anyone. You don't chase reactions. You simply express yourself and allow things to unfold. And that's where emotional pacing comes in. Most people rush connection because they're afraid of losing it. They try to build depth quickly to secure something before it fades. But real connection doesn't work like that. It builds over time, through shared experiences, through gradual understanding. When you slow down, when you allow things to develop naturally, you create space for genuine attraction to grow. You're not forcing a connection, you're discovering it. There's also a subtle but powerful balance between being engaged and being detached. Not emotionally unavailable, but not overly invested either. When you're too attached to an outcome, it changes how you behave. You start analyzing everything, adjusting yourself, trying to control how the other person feels. But when you let go of that need, when you're present without expectation, you create freedom in the interaction. And that freedom feels good. It removes pressure. It allows both people to simply be. And finally, there's your presence. The way you carry yourself when you're not trying to impress anyone. That's where your real influence lies. A calm, grounded presence doesn't demand attention, but it naturally draws it. It's in the way you hold eye contact without forcing it, the way you listen without interrupting, the way you remain steady even when things are uncertain. This kind of presence isn't built overnight. It comes from knowing yourself, from being comfortable with who you are. Attraction isn't something you chase. It's something that forms when you stop interfering with your own nature. When you remove the need to impress, the need to control, the need to rush, what's left is something authentic. And authenticity, in a world full of performance, is rare. And rare is always noticed. There's something most men never question. Why, in moments that should feel natural, they suddenly feel the need to prove themselves. It's almost automatic. The moment attraction appears, so does the pressure. To say more, do more, be more. And without realizing it, they step out of their center and into a performance. Not because they're lacking, but because they've been conditioned to believe that effort creates desire. But attraction doesn't work like that. It doesn't respond to effort, it responds to energy. And energy is shaped by how you think, how you feel, and most importantly, how you regulate yourself in real time. The moment you start trying to control how someone sees you, you've already shifted the dynamic. You're no longer expressing, you're managing perception. And that subtle shift creates tension. A tension people can feel, even if they can't explain it. One of the deepest mindset shifts is understanding the power of emotional discipline. Not suppression, but control. Because every interaction tests your ability to stay grounded. When something unexpected happens, delayed replies, mixed signals, moments of silence, most men react. They overthink, they assume, they chase clarity. But the man who remains steady in those moments sends a completely different message. He's not thrown off balance. He doesn't need immediate reassurance. And that kind of composure creates a psychological edge. It signals independence, and independence is attractive. There's also a hidden dynamic in how attention is exchanged. Most people think giving more attention increases connection. But in reality, it often does the opposite. When attention is constant, it removes space. And without space, there's no room for thought, no room for curiosity. The brain needs contrast. It needs presence and absence, engagement and pause. That contrast is what keeps someone thinking about you. When your attention isn't guaranteed, it becomes something to notice, something to value. But this only works when it's real. If you're pretending to be less available while internally waiting for a response, the energy doesn't align. And people can feel that disconnect. True selectiveness comes from having a life that's already full. When your time has purpose, when your focus is divided between meaningful things, you naturally stop overinvesting in one person. And that balance changes how you show up. You're no longer trying to fill a gap, you're simply choosing to share your time. At a deeper level, everything comes back to self-perception. How you see yourself shapes every interaction you have. If you believe you need to earn someone's interest, your behavior will reflect that. You'll try harder, adjust more, and slowly move away from your natural state. But when you shift that belief, when you see yourself as already enough, you stop negotiating your value. You don't feel the need to impress, and that quiet confidence becomes visible in everything you do. Another key element is emotional pacing. Most men rush connection because they fear losing the opportunity. They try to create closeness quickly, thinking speed will secure interest. But real attraction isn't built in intensity alone, it's built in progression. It grows through moments that unfold naturally, through conversations that develop over time, through a rhythm that feels unforced. When you slow down, you allow anticipation to build. You give the other person time to think about you, to wonder, to feel something beyond the immediate moment. And in that space, something powerful happens. Curiosity deepens. Because when everything is revealed too quickly, there's nothing left to discover. But when there's a sense of depth, a feeling that there's more beneath the surface, people become invested. Not because you're trying to pull them in, but because they want to understand you. There's also a balance between connection and detachment that very few people master. Being fully present, but not emotionally dependent. Caring, but not clinging. This balance creates a certain lightness in interactions. There's no pressure to perform, no urgency to define everything. And that freedom allows attraction to breathe. Because when people feel like they're not being pushed toward an outcome, they relax. And in that relaxed state, genuine interest has room to grow. And then there's presence, the one thing that ties everything together. Not what you say, not what you show, but how you feel to be around. A man who is constantly seeking validation feels different from one who is internally grounded. The first feels restless, slightly tense, always trying to maintain something. The second feels calm, steady, unaffected by external fluctuations. And that difference is powerful. Because people don't just respond to actions, they respond to emotional states. When you're grounded, you don't rush to fill silence. You don't over-explain your thoughts. You don't chase reactions. You allow moments to exist without forcing them into something more. And that restraint and that ability to simply be creates a kind of quiet authority. Not dominance in the loud sense, but in the composed, controlled sense. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but naturally draws it. Everything shifts when you stop trying to control attraction and start understanding it. When you realize it's not about doing more, but about doing less, less chasing, less proving, less reacting. What's left is clarity, a sense of ease, a presence that doesn't need to compete. And in that space, you don't become more attractive by trying. You become it by not trying at all. There's a point where you start to notice a pattern, not just in others, but in yourself. The moment you feel drawn to someone, your behavior subtly changes. You become more aware, more careful, more invested. And without realizing it, you begin to operate from a place of anticipation, waiting for a response, analyzing small shifts, trying to read between the lines. It feels natural, almost unavoidable. But hidden inside that pattern is the very thing that weakens your presence. Because attraction isn't built in anticipation, it's built in certainty. Not certainty about the outcome, but certainty within yourself. And most men lose that the moment they start focusing too much on being liked. Their attention shifts outward. Their sense of control becomes dependent on someone else's reactions. And in that shift, they give away something valuable, their emotional center. One of the most powerful changes you can make is learning to hold that center, no matter what's happening around you. When something feels uncertain, most people rush to resolve it. They seek clarity, reassurance, immediate answers. But the man who can sit in that uncertainty without reacting impulsively creates a completely different dynamic. He doesn't chase resolution, he allows it to come naturally. And that patience signals something deeper than confidence. It signals self-trust. Self-trust changes the way you experience everything. You stop overanalyzing every interaction. You stop trying to decode every message. Because you're no longer looking for validation. You're observing reality. And when you observe instead of react, your decisions become clearer. You respond with intention, not emotion. And that shift alone separates you from the majority. There's also something subtle that happens when you stop overgiving your attention. Your mind becomes quieter. You're no longer constantly thinking about what to say next or how to keep someone interested. Instead, you become more present in your own life. And that presence has an effect. Because when your attention is not scattered, it becomes more focused, more intentional. And when you choose to give it, it carries weight. Most people underestimate how much value is placed on attention. It's not just about time, it's about where your focus goes. When your attention is always available, it blends into the background. But when it's directed with purpose, it stands out. It creates moments that feel different, interactions that feel intentional. And people remember that, not consciously but emotionally. But this only works when it comes from a real place. If you're trying to appear less available while internally feeling anxious or attached, there's a disconnect. And that disconnect shows up in small ways: your tone, your timing, your energy. True selectiveness isn't something you perform. It's something that naturally happens when your life is already full. When you have priorities, direction, and things that matter, you don't feel the need to overinvest in one person. You engage, but you don't lose yourself. And that's where real confidence begins. Not in what you show, but in what you don't need to show. A man who knows his value doesn't feel the need to constantly express it. He doesn't overexplain, he doesn't overcompensate, and he doesn't adjust himself just to be accepted. There's a quiet consistency in how he moves, how he speaks, how he responds. And that consistency creates trust. Attraction, at a deeper level, is tied to emotional experience. It's not just about how someone looks or what they say, it's about how they make you feel over time. And feelings don't build in intensity alone. They build in rhythm, in moments of connection followed by space, in interactions that leave something unsaid, in a pace that feels natural instead of forced. When you slow down that pace, when you stop trying to rush outcomes, you allow something more organic to form. You give the other person time to process, to reflect, to feel your presence, even when you're not there. And that space is important, because without it, everything becomes immediate. And what's immediate is often taken for granted. There's also a balance that most people struggle to maintain: the balance between caring and detaching. Caring shows interest, but detachment preserves your independence. When you lean too far into either side, something feels off. Too much detachment feels cold. Too much attachment feels heavy. But when you find that middle ground, something clicks. You're engaged, but not dependent. You're interested, but not invested in controlling the outcome. And that balance creates a kind of emotional clarity that's rare. And then there's your presence, the way you exist without trying to influence anything. That's where everything becomes visible. A man who is internally unsettled will always try to control the external. He'll try to guide conversations, manage impressions, predict outcomes. But a man who is internally stable doesn't need to do any of that. He allows things to unfold. He trusts the process. And that trust creates a calm, grounded energy. People can feel that energy. They might not be able to explain it, but they notice it. It feels different from the usual interactions they're used to. There's no pressure, no hidden urgency, no need to impress. And because of that, it becomes memorable. Everything changes when you stop chasing reactions and start maintaining your state. When your focus shifts from "how do I make this work" to "how do I stay grounded no matter what," you gain something far more powerful than attraction. You gain control over yourself. And once you have that, you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing.